Most people think airports are about getting from point A to point B. You show up, check in, go through security, wait at the gate, board the plane. Simple. But if you've ever felt like your travel days are longer than they should be, more exhausting than they need to be, or just slightly chaotic in a way you can't explain, it's not random, it's patterns. Because airports aren't just places, they're systems. And like any system, they reward people who understand how they actually work, not how they appear to work. You can see it at the gate. There's always a group of people standing long before boarding starts, hovering, watching, slowly forming a wall around the boarding lanes. They're not told to do this, no one instructs them, but they do it anyway. And what's interesting is, it doesn't help them. Your seat is already assigned. Your boarding group isn't changing. Standing there doesn't get you on the plane faster in any meaningful way, but it feels like progress. And that's the first pattern. Most people optimize for the feeling of moving forward, not actual efficiency. So they stand, they crowd, they inch closer to the gate. And in doing that, they unintentionally slow the system down for everyone, including themselves. Because now the people who actually need space, families, wheelchair passengers, crew, have to navigate through a human bottleneck. Boarding pauses, instructions repeat, friction builds, and you're still just standing there. What experienced travelers do instead is almost invisible. They step away, not far, just enough, sometimes at the adjacent gate, and sometimes across the seating area where the announcements still carry. Close enough to move when needed, but far enough to stay out of the flow, because they understand something subtle. Airports reward positioning, not proximity. You don't need to be first in line. You need to be in the right place at the right moment. And that small shift changes how the entire experience feels. You're not guarding your spot anymore. You're observing the system. And this shows up again the moment you choose your seat. Most people pick based on convenience. Aisle for easy access, window for the view, middle seat, only if there's no other option. But if you've ever felt that slow wave of discomfort during turbulence, that slight nausea that builds without warning, seat choice becomes something else entirely. Because planes don't move evenly. The back absorbs more motion, the front lifts and drops more noticeably, but over the wings, near the center of gravity, movement stabilizes. It's not perfectly still, but it's controlled. And this is what most people miss. The goal isn't to eliminate discomfort. It's to position yourself where the system absorbs it for you. That window seat over the wing isn't just about the view. It gives your body a reference point, the horizon, which helps your brain reconcile movement. It reduces the mismatch between what you feel and what you see. And that mismatch is what creates motion sickness. So experienced travelers don't just pick a seat. They choose stability. They bring small adjustments with them too. Hydration, light meals, something as simple as ginger candy. Not because it's dramatic, but because small variables compound over time. And airports, flights, travel in general, they're all environments where small inefficiencies stack quickly. You start to feel it when you settle into your seat. You put your bag down, maybe reach into the seat pocket, rest your head against the window. It feels harmless, routine even. But this is where the system reveals another layer, because airplanes are optimized for turnaround time, not deep cleaning. What gets removed between flights is visible trash. What doesn't is everything else. The tray table you eat on, the armrest you lean against, the window you rest your head on. These are high-contact surfaces with minimal reset, and over time they accumulate more than most people realize. So experienced travelers don't assume cleanliness, but they reset their immediate environment themselves. A quick wipe, a small pause before settling in. It's not about paranoia, it's about control. Because when you rely entirely on the system, you inherit its blind spots. And once you start seeing that, you notice it everywhere, especially at security. This is where people shift from calm to chaotic almost instantly. Shoes coming off too late, liquids buried in bags, laptops unreachable. You can feel the tension build in the line, people rushing, but not actually moving faster. And again, it comes back to the same pattern. They're reacting instead of preparing, trying to solve the step while they're already inside it. But security isn't unpredictable. It's repetitive, the same requirements, the same sequence, over and over. So experienced travelers don't wait until they reach the front. They prepare before the system asks them to. Shoes that slide off easily, liquids already separated, electronics positioned for quick removal, not because they're in a hurry, but because they understand something deeper. Speed in airports doesn't come from rushing. It comes from reducing friction. And when you remove friction, everything feels smoother, quieter, more controlled. But this is where things start to shift. Because up to this point, most of what you've seen are surface-level adjustments, small improvements that make the process easier. What comes next is different. Because this is where experienced travelers start interacting with the system itself, not just moving through it. And once you see that, you stop traveling like everyone else. Once you move past the obvious, something subtle starts to happen. You stop reacting to airports and start anticipating them. And this is where things change. Because now you're not just thinking about where to stand or what seat to pick. You're thinking about what the system is quietly optimizing for. And one of the clearest examples of that is time. Most people are told to arrive early, 2 hours, 3 hours, sometimes more, and they follow it exactly. They show up, and then they wait. Walk slowly. Browse shops. Sit near the gate long before anything happens. It feels responsible. But what's actually happening is something else. Airports aren't just transit spaces. They're designed environments. Every path you walk, every seat you choose, in every delay you experience, is shaped in a way that increases the chance you spend money. Longer dwell time equals higher spending. So the system quietly encourages you to arrive earlier than necessary, and then gives you just enough friction to keep you inside it. Long security lines, indirect walking routes, duty-free layouts that force you through retail before you reach your gate. And most people accept it as normal. But experienced travelers start questioning it. Not aggressively, just quietly. They begin to calibrate their arrival time based on variables that actually matter. Airport size, time of day, flight type, current wait times, not a fixed rule, but a moving estimate. Because showing up too early doesn't make your trip smoother. It just extends the part of the journey where you have the least control. And this is what most people miss. Control in travel doesn't come from being early. It comes from being precise, arriving with enough buffer to absorb unpredictability, but not so much that you hand over hours of your time to a system designed to keep you there. And once you start seeing that, you notice how often the system nudges you into unnecessary decisions. Like duty-free shopping. It feels like an opportunity, tax-free, limited time, airport exclusive. But in reality, it's often just repositioned pricing, base costs adjusted, convenience layered on top. And there's another detail people overlook. Liquids, that bottle you buy at one airport, may not make it through security at your connection, even if it's sealed. So what looked like a deal turns into a loss. Experienced travelers don't avoid these areas entirely. They just don't assume value. They compare, they question, they delay decisions until they have full context. Because they understand. Airports are very good at creating urgency where none exists. And once you recognize that, you start making calmer choices. Which brings us to something even more subtle. Water. It seems like the simplest thing. You sit down, order a coffee or tea, maybe ask for ice. Routine. But behind that routine is a system most people never think about. The water on board an aircraft doesn't come from a fresh, filtered tap in the way you might expect. It's stored, transported, maintained across different cycles. And while it meets safety standards, the quality isn't always consistent. So experienced travelers adjust. Not dramatically. They just shift where their water comes from. An empty bottle through security, a refill station in the terminal, sealed drinks when available, small decisions that remove uncertainty. And this pattern keeps repeating. Overhead bins. This is one of the biggest sources of quiet anxiety during boarding. People rush, not because they need to sit down, but because they're trying to secure space. And it creates that familiar tension. Faster boarding groups, subtle competition, people watching every bag that goes up. But here's the part that changes everything. Overhead space isn't actually first come, first served in the way people think. It's constrained, but also managed. Gate agents already anticipate when bins will fill, and when they do, they start offering free gate checks. Which means, if you're one of the last to board, you're often given an option others paid to avoid. Your bag gets checked for free, and you don't have to carry it through the cabin. But most people never take advantage of this, because they're still operating under the assumption that earlier is always better. And sometimes, it isn't. Sometimes, letting the system reach its limit works in your favor. And this is where experienced travelers become very selective about where they apply effort. They don't try to optimize everything. They focus on pressure points, moments where small decisions create outsized impact, like turbulence. Most people treat it as something that happens to them. Unexpected, random, slightly alarming. But inside the cabin, there are signals. Flight attendants sitting down earlier than expected. The carts being secured quickly. Subtle shifts in tone. These are indicators. And experienced travelers pay attention. Not because they're anxious, but because they understand that awareness creates time. Time to return to your seat. Time to secure your space. Time to reduce risk before it arrives. And one of the simplest habits is also one of the most overlooked. Keeping your seatbelt loosely fastened, even when the sign is off. It doesn't restrict you. It just anchors you, in case the system changes suddenly. Because at 35,000 feet, reaction time is limited. Preparation is everything, and this idea extends beyond safety. It shows up in how you interact with people, gate agents, flight attendants, staff moving through a constant stream of pressure and unpredictability. But most travelers only engage with them when something goes wrong. And when they do, it's often rushed, frustrated, demanding. But here's what experienced travelers understand. These people operate within constraints, but they still have discretion. Small decisions they can make, when they choose to. A seat adjustment, a waived fee, a subtle upgrade. And those decisions are rarely triggered by force. They're influenced by tone, by timing, by how you enter the interaction. A calm question, instead of a demand. A moment of patience, instead of pressure. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it changes the probability. And over time, that difference adds up. Because travel isn't just about systems. It's about how you move within them. But there's one more layer most people never reach. Because it's hidden. That not behind a door, but behind awareness. And once you see it, you start noticing details that were always there, just never obvious. If you stay in an airport long enough, you start to notice things that don't announce themselves. They're not signs, not instructions, just small details, placed exactly where they need to be. And this is what most people miss, because by the time they reach this part of the journey, they've already decided the experience is out of their control. They're just following it now. Gate to seat, seat to landing. But the system never actually stops giving you options. They just become quieter, like the moment you walk down the aisle. Most people are focused on one thing, getting to their seat without holding anyone up, so they move quickly, eyes forward. They miss what's right in front of them, under the overhead bins. There are small handholds built into the structure, not labeled, not explained, but they're there for a reason. Because movement inside a plane isn't stable, and when turbulence hits unexpectedly, Those small design choices become the difference between control and reaction. Experienced travelers don't wait to need them. They notice them early. They map their environment, even in motion. So when something shifts, they're already oriented. And this carries into how they choose where to sit, even within the same row. There are small markers above certain windows. Black triangles, easy to ignore, but they align with critical points on the wing. Reference spots used by crew to assess movement, icing, mechanical behavior. To most passengers, it's just another window. To someone paying attention, it's the most informative seat in that section of the plane because it gives you visibility into how the aircraft is actually responding, not just how it feels. And that awareness changes your relationship with the experience. You're not just feeling turbulence anymore. You're observing it, understanding it. And that removes a layer of uncertainty. But this is where things deepen, because some parts of the system are intentionally hidden, not because they're secret, but because they're not meant to be part of your experience. Like crew rest areas. On long flights, you might notice flight attendants disappear for hours. No announcement, no explanation. And if you're not familiar with how long-haul operations work, it can feel strange. But behind that absence is a structured rotation. Hidden compartments, enclosed bunks, quiet spaces built into the aircraft itself. Because fatigue at altitude isn't just discomfort, it's risk. So the system protects against it, quietly. And once you understand that, you start seeing absence differently, not as neglect, but as preparation. And this shift from assumption to understanding keeps showing up, even in moments that feel routine, like lighting, cabin lights dimming during takeoff and landing. Most people treat it as atmosphere, something to make the space feel calmer, but it's not for comfort. It's for adaptation, your eyes adjusting to low-light conditions, in case visibility drops suddenly. So if something happens, you're not disoriented. You're ready. And the same applies to window shades being open. It's not about preference, it's about visibility. Seeing outside conditions, assessing hazards, every detail tied back to safety. But because it's presented calmly, most people don't question it. They follow, without understanding. And that's the pattern. Airports and airplanes are full of decisions that look optional, but aren't. And once you start recognizing which is which, you move differently. You stop resisting certain things and start aligning with them. You keep your seatbelt loosely fastened, even when you don't have to. You count rows to the nearest exit, even when it feels unnecessary. You listen, not because it's required, but because you understand the context. And over time, this builds something subtle. Confidence, not loud, not visible, just a quiet sense that you're not guessing anymore. You're reading the environment as it is, not as it appears. And this is where experienced travelers separate themselves completely. Because they're no longer trying to make travel comfortable. They're making it predictable, reducing unknowns, smoothing variables, turning what feels chaotic into something structured. And when you reach that point, even delays feel different. You notice how people react immediately. Phones out, complaints rising, tension spreading across the gate. Because to most travelers, a delay is lost time. But to someone who understands the system, it's a shift in variables, a chance to reposition, check alternative flights, move closer to assistance counters early before the line forms, or sometimes do nothing at all, because not every change requires action, and knowing the difference is what saves energy. And this final layer, it's the one that changes everything, because once you stop trying to control the entire journey, and instead focus on where control actually exists, travel becomes lighter, not easier in a dramatic way, just smoother. You're not rushing unnecessarily. You're not waiting without purpose. You're not reacting to every small disruption. You're moving with the system, instead of against it. And most of the time, no one notices. because it doesn't look like anything special. You're just calm, in a place where most people aren't. And that's the difference. Small changes create a completely different experience. If you've experienced this, you'll recognize it.